Hey, I'm Jake, and I'm making a game called A Short Odyssey. Welcome to devlog number 2. Today, I'm going to tell you how I made water in my game. So, for a game taking place entirely on an island surrounded by water, this is kind of important, right? Okay, so making water in a game, it's actually really easy. All you gotta do is you go in the Unity asset store and... Sorry? What? What do you mean? We're not using Unity? What is this? It's a custom engine? Custom engine. Okay, so I've been told that we're actually using custom engine, so I guess I'm gonna have to write it myself. So drawing water is something that seems simple, but there's actually a lot of little things to get right. Most materials in my game are opaque, so you can't see through them. This simplifies the rendering a lot, but water's more complicated than that. Water has 3 elements that I think you really need to get right for it to look like water. And those 3 elements are reflection, refraction, and absorption. Reflection is exactly what it sounds like. Basically, when you look at water, it reflects the environment, it reflects nearby objects, things like that. You can see them in the water. Refraction, the next thing, is the way that light bends when it goes through the water. And that's why things look all wavy and distorted when they're below the water. Finally, we have absorption. This is why water often looks blue. Basically, when light travels through water, not all of it comes back out the other side. And it gets darker and less transparent, and usually more blue the deeper you go. So how did I implement these things? In reverse order of complexity, let's start with absorption. Absorption is really the easiest to do, at least to a passable degree. I simply blended the color below the water with a blue color based on how deep it was below the water. I wanted to try to be somewhat, physically accurate, so I looked up a table of seawater absorption, and I kind of figured it matched this curve pretty well. And there we go, that's absorption. Next we have refraction, which is a little bit more involved, but not that much. But also my implementation's not technically physically accurate, so take from that what you will. Basically, we just need to warp the image below the water based on the shape of the water's surface. I do this by sampling my normal map, which is a texture used to simulate surface detail in games. I use that to offset the coordinates of the image below the water, which we are also sampling when we draw the water. Finally, we have reflections. This is the most complicated part, and the part that I'm currently the least satisfied with. But it took me a while to get working, so I think I'm just going to move on at this point. There are many ways to do reflections, and in this game I used 2. I use static environment maps to reflect the sky. This gives pretty accurate reflections, but unfortunately doesn't reflect anything that can move. This is where the second method comes in, and it's kind of controversial amongst some gamers. That is screen space reflections. Screen space reflections works in real time, and it can reflect all sorts of things. And this performance of the technique is independent of the complexity of the scene, which means it can be pretty fast. But unfortunately, there's a catch. It can only reflect things that are actually on the screen. And that leads to certain artifacts when things are not visible naturally to the player. But they're in the game right now, so I'm rolling with them for now. I might mess around with some other techniques in the future, but for now we gotta move on to the physics. The physics. Like many of you, I've been playing a lot of Tears of the Kingdom lately, and one thing I love about that game is that, if you do something in the game the way you would expect it to happen in the real world, it just usually kind of works. And this happens with the water. So if you could throw anything in the water that you think would float or sink, in the real world, and, it would float or sink based on what you would expect. So I wanted to do something similar. I used the bullet physics engine to help simulate the objects in my game. Unfortunately, the bullet physics engine does not support buoyancy simulation right in the box. Luckily, however, a man in the 3rd century named Archimedes of Syracuse observed that the buoyant force exerted on an object in a fluid is equal to the weight of the fluid that is displaced by that object. And that's all in this simple formula. So equivalently, this means that the force is equal to the volume of the object below the water times the density of that object times the acceleration due to gravity. Well, how do I know the volume below the water? Well, it's actually a really complicated thing, and it depends on the shape of the object and some complicated math for plane intersection. But to avoid boring anyone who is still watching this video, I'll just tell you that it involves tetrahedrons, and I found the answer in an old game programming gem 6. which you can borrow on archive.org. I'd like to thank Aaron Cato for writing the article Exact Buoyancy for Polyhedra. Okay, simple. So just smack that on top of bullet physics and call it a day, right? Oh, what's that? Oh, things are bouncing now. Uh-oh. Well, maybe we need to simulate drag. Okay, so let's plug in drag. Oh, it's even worse now. So basically, it turns out that in the real world, time moves continuously. And in the game, we only simulate things at a fixed rate, usually 60 times per second. So certain types of things, like physically correct quadratic drag equations, tend not to work well in a discrete simulation. So instead, I pulled a linear approximation from the same article I mentioned before, and everything works now. Hopefully that's everything you care to know about video game water. I know I'm ready to move on. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, let me know by hitting like or leaving a comment down below. Tell me, what game do you think has the best water? Or, if you really like this and want to see more, why don't you subscribe?